Welcome to Gun Owner Against Violence. Today our guest is Rich Aucoin. Welcome to the show, Rich.
Thank you, Michael.
Rich, you've been very busy running for a local office. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was interesting. I've never run for office before, so it was something new for me. It was very exciting going out into the ward where I've lived my entire life and getting to know people that I was close to but didn't really know. And I learned a lot about the ward, I learned a lot about the people, and I'll probably do it again someday because it was great.
Wonderful. Now, on the topic of guns, crime, and violence, do you feel that there's a difference between a violent criminal and a responsible, law-abiding gun owner? And if so, how would you define that difference?
Well, I think clearly there is. Somebody who happens to be a gun owner or somebody who target shoots or whatever kind of activities they do with their gun, as long as they don't harm anybody else with it, then it's no different from owning any other object as far as I can see. They have a right to own it, and it's not my business.
Sure. No more or less dangerous than power tools or automobiles or...
Right. Any other object that one might own, if they don't mean any harm with it, then it's none of my business.
Sure. What then is your interpretation of the Second Amendment?
The Second Amendment is, you mean literally how I feel about the wording of it?
Yes.
Well, I think the Founding Fathers meant for it to be, it was meant to be something we could use to defend ourselves against an all-powerful tyrannical government that might try to usurp our freedoms, because they had just experienced something similar to that with Britain. So they wanted to write something into our new Constitution that made it, that guaranteed their right to bear arms so that they could overthrow any kind of government like that might come up again in the future. They wrote it right there in the Declaration of Independence that we would have the right to overthrow a government if it became tyrannical again. So I think that's what they had in mind. But I also think personally it's very important to realize that just the right to self-defense is important too. And even though I don't think that's what the Founding Fathers had in mind with the Second Amendment, I personally believe people have a right to bear arms for their own self-protection as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree, because in the research I've done, it shows that there wasn't an active or formal law enforcement in place until 1845. So I think they had a very keen sense of needing to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm. It's just as simple as, again, the Declaration of Independence did say that we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These weren't rights given to us by other men. These were rights given to us by the Creator. We were born with them. Mm-hmm. Regardless of who you think the Creator is, we were born with these rights the same way we were born with our left arm. And if someone tries to take them away, that's like them trying to rip your arm off. They don't have a right to do that. So for somebody to take away your right of self-defense, that's like somebody trying to rip your arm off. They can't do it. It's wrong.
Sure. So that being the case, do you feel that the Second Amendment offers a collective or an individual right to keep and bear arms?
I don't know if we'll ever resolve that question, because we have different people who want to view it different ways, and unfortunately it was written in a way that's somewhat ambiguous. All I can say is what I believe, and that is that everyone has a right to defend themselves, and if they want to use a gun to do that, again, I can't remove that right. I'm a mere man. I can't do that.
Sure. Now, you and I are both libertarians. What do you feel is the libertarian point of view regarding crime, violence, and firearms?
We think, I can't speak for every libertarian, but I think in general we believe that the biggest culprit in today's society, the biggest thing that causes the most violence, is prohibition. Drug prohibition in particular causes underworld activity, gang wars. It makes our streets unsafe. It actually causes people to want to sell drugs because of the obscene profits they can make doing it. When I was a kid, the reason why we did drugs was because it was illegal. It was cool to do it. That's why kids did it then, and probably why they still do it today. So I think prohibition is very counterproductive to society and causes a lot of our problems, and I'd like to see it ended.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As far as guns, just to keep going.
Sure.
I think that to the extent that there is gun violence in society, I think that's a symptom of the larger problem that I just described. If we could get rid of prohibition and the gang wars that come along with it, I think we'd see a lot less gun violence.
Mm-hmm. How would something like that come about? Let's say, for instance, prohibition were repealed. We've heard that term before in another instance. But let's say prohibition of guns were repealed. How would that come to be? What would
Prohibition of guns
Yes.
repealed?
I'm sorry, drugs.
Drugs.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay. If we repeal drugs, it would just make things a lot better. It would be like alcohol. We could have it an age by which we agree that it's okay to buy it, and we could protect children from it. We wouldn't have people selling drugs to just anybody in the street anymore like we did with alcohol in the 1920s, and we wouldn't have all the violence again, like I said, that go along with it. When we legalized the dangerous drug alcohol, we made our streets a lot safer.
Sure.
And I'd like to do that again.
And it could be regulated much like liquor stores, where they need to ask people for ID, and,
Right.
and I'm sure you have to be licensed to own a liquor store and like that.
Right.
Okay. Now, we've talked about the libertarian point of view about crime, violence, and firearms. What about your own personal view? Is there anything different there, or anywhere you want to expand on that? Or?
Well, again, I say I speak for myself, and it so happens that the Libertarian Party agrees generally with what I believe in, which is why I came to them, which is why I took a look at the other parties, realized that I don't belong there, and why I ended up with the Libertarian Party. For the most part, I agree with them, and they agree with me.
Okay. How would you address concerns of people who feel that the presence of firearms increases the likelihood of crime and violence?
I think the biggest thing that increases the likelihood of crime and violence is criminals knowing that there are strict gun laws in place. I mean, if I were a criminal and I had a choice between going into a neighborhood to commit a crime where I knew there was strict gun control, or where I knew that there was liberal gun rights, where people actually had guns in their houses to defend themselves, I think it's pretty obvious which neighborhood a burglar would choose to go into. And that's the analogy I like to use, because it's just common sense that we don't want only criminals to be the ones carrying guns. We want to make sure that good people have them too.
Sure.
And we want the criminals to know that first and foremost.
Sure. Just like when we were in school, I mean, the bullies knew which ones they could get away with picking on.
Of course.
And it's no different, I think, with criminals. They know which people they can, or we hope they know.
I'd like to see criminals have to guess who they're going to get hurt by, like we all have to guess which ones of them are going to attack us.
Good point. Good point. So, in a manner of speaking, the more guns there are in society by responsible gun owners, the more it is kind of a roulette wheel for them when they break into a home.
Right, and I personally don't want a gun. I don't generally like them. I'm a little intimidated by them, and I don't think I'd want one. But if I ever did want one, and if I ever did feel like I needed one, no law would stop me from having one.
Sure.
So I don't think gun laws work as far as reducing violence at all. I think they make matters worse.
Sure. In what way?
As we've said, criminals think that criminals know that that they'll be the only ones armed under strict gun control, and I don't want that.
Sure.
I want them to be just as afraid as everybody else in society, and that might change their ways.
Are there ways of dealing with crime and violence that do not involve gun control?
Of course there are, and as I've said, I think the biggest thing we can do is get rid of prohibition. That's the biggest culprit. But and it's not just drug prohibition. We can get rid of all other kinds of prohibition that don't work. Prohibitions against prostitution and gambling and everything else. I don't like to see people being driven out into the street to conduct their activities and in alleyways. I think that's generally bad for society.
So it makes them go underground, so to speak.
Right. It makes criminals out of people who aren't really violent towards anybody. And I'm not in favor of any kinds of regulations or laws that would do that.
Sure, sure. On the flip